days. And we're very excited thrilled to welcome you here today. Throughout this today, we have created a range of keynotes and panels and breakout sessions, and also the Afro Gala that we're going to have at the conference, and we look forward to having you guys there. I'm going to pass the floor now to Aiki, our other conference co-chair, and she'll give you like more background about the conference.
Good evening, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Karibu, Akwaba, My name is Aiki Nsubi, and on behalf of the entire Columbia Africa Conference, it is both my honor and pleasure to welcome you all tonight at the 21st Annual Columbia Africa Conference. Before we begin, I would like to thank you all for being here. I'd also like to take a moment to express a heartfelt gratitude to many stakeholders who have made today's gathering possible. We extend our sincerest thanks to partners and sponsors, as well as the departments and administrations across Columbia schools who have provided our clubs with essential support, resources, contacts, funding, and guidance throughout the whole planning process. We are also grateful to our esteemed speakers, many of whom have traveled from across the U.S. and the African continent. Their commitment to youth empowerment, the advancement of Africa, and the pursuit of excellence is evident in their willingness to invest their time and resources to do this. This conference would not be possible without the generous support and dedication of these individuals and institutions. Their unwavering commitment to foster meaningful dialogue and collaboration is invaluable, and we are appreciative of their contribution. Launched in 2004, the Columbia Africa Conference, previously known as the African Economic Forum, history that began as a modest gathering aimed at fostering dialogue among scholars and practitioners focused on African development. This conference is a cross-school collaboration involving Columbia Business School, the School of International Public Affairs, the Mailman School of Health, and the Law School. Over the years, it has evolved into the largest Africa-focused event at Columbia. Each year, the African community at Columbia and in the surrounding areas eagerly anticipate this platform to discuss and explore the continent's dynamic landscape, along with its challenges and opportunities. This year's theme, Navigating Disruption, was chosen to reflect Africa's unique position at the intersection of unprecedented global and local changes. By delving into this topic, the conference aims to equip students and young professionals with actionable solutions that empower African nations to transform disruptions into opportunities for meaningful change and long-term prosperity. Always, we will engage in insightful discussions on a range of critical topics. I urge all of you to actively participate in these sessions, share your insights, and collaborate with your fellow colleagues. Moreover, I also encourage you to take the discussions and lessons learned here into your respective professions. Together, we can harness our collective expertise to spark conversations that lead to actionable solutions, ensuring that Africa not only navigates disruptions, but thrives in the evolving global landscape. I will now hand over the floor to my co-chair, Bridget Asante, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Hello, everyone. As Aiki mentioned, my name is Bridget Asante, and I'm one of the conference co-chairs from Columbia Business School. To begin our pivotal discussions, it's a great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, the United Nations Special Advisor on Africa to the Secretary General, Under Secretary General Christina Duarte. Her Excellency brings an unparalleled depth of insight into Africa's evolving landscape and the pathways to sustainable growth. With over 3 decades of leadership in both public policy and the private sector, she has continuously advocated for a transformative approach to policy making in Africa, emphasizing the importance of development financing, technological advancement, and digital integration as catalysts for growth. Her leadership has underscored governance and domestic resource mobilization as essential pillars for empowering the continent, with human capital as the driving force behind effective policy making. When our team addition the ideal person to open this conference and to set the tone for our discussions. Ms. Duarte's dictionary profile made her the obvious choice. Though Her Excellency could not join us in person tonight, she has prepared a special video message for us and sent a representative to speak on her behalf. We look forward to hearing their valuable insights on navigating disruption and harnessing innovation to build a prosperous future. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Director Jean-Paul Adam, Director for Policy, Monitoring and Advocacy in the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa to the United Nations General Secretary. Let's put our hands together as we welcome them.
Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the Under-Secretary General, who will also be following with a message. So allow me to briefly introduce myself, because I'm sure you don't know me. I am Jean-Paul Adam, and I'm currently working with Christina Duarte, the Under-Secretary General, and I'm formerly a Minister of Foreign Affairs, of Finance, and of Health of the Republic of Seychelles. And for those who have not heard of Seychelles, it's Africa's smallest country. There's only 100,000 people. It's off the east coast of Africa. And I'm very delighted to join so many students from Africa who are here, but also people who share the goal of seeing a transformed African continent. So I'm delighted to share a few thoughts ahead of the keynote address to be delivered through the recording of the Under-Secretary General, Christina Duarte. So first of all, I would like to commend you for placing Africa's priorities at the forefront of your agenda while navigating the disruptions, which you have alluded to in the theme. We need to approach resilience building and transformation with great intentionality, because more than ever, it is clear that the transformation that we need will not emerge either from a handout or from an imposition from outside. The transformation can only come from within Africa itself. It is evident that Africa has the least resilience to global shocks, whether they be pandemics, economic shocks, or the existential threat represented by climate change. While the world is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, the recovery in Africa, unfortunately economically, has a slightly different trajectory. Yes, we have growth, but Africa is on the cusp of a debt crisis. Debt service costs in Africa have doubled since 2020. 40% of African countries are spending more on debt service than they are on health. Africa is vulnerable, but Africa is far from powerless. And in this moment where we are navigating disruption, Africa can chart the way for others to follow. For we are at a crossroads, both in terms of geopolitics, as well as in terms of development. Our Under-Secretary General, who will be hearing from him very shortly, has often remarked that the Africa we want is the Africa that the world needs. Africa holds the key to more even and more sustained global growth through its natural resource endowments, perhaps even more critically, through its demographic dividend. By 2050, in the 15 to 34 age group bracket, the number of young Africans is expected to increase by 73%. In that same period, and in that same age group, globally, the growth is only going to be 6%. The future is literally Africa. So how do we unlock this opportunity? Firstly, we need to make sure that everyone understands that a sustainable global future is anchored in Africa's success. This means a dismantling of the extractive nature of Africa's economic relationship with the rest of the world, which started with colonialism. The Under-Secretary General will share with you our office's work on Africa's three paradoxes: paradox of finance, of food, and energy. In these three areas, Africa faces the paradox of potential abundance, but a failure to be able to effectively mobilize these resources. So we must ask, what are our strategies to deliver the resilience and transformation needed? Most critically, we must strengthen African country systems to mobilize the resources which belong to Africa, but which do not currently serve Africa. There are 500 to 600 billion US dollars leaving the continent annually through a variety of forms: illicit financial flows, inefficient taxation, extortionate debt servicing, or trade mispricing. All of these can be harnessed through strengthening our institutions and also using opportunities, for example, provided by digital technologies. Meanwhile, connecting the almost 600 million Africans without access to electricity will provide one of the most significant boosts possible to economic productivity. And with around 65% of the world's arable land in Africa, the continent can feed itself while also generating meaningful economic opportunities for the bulk of the population currently engaged in subsistence farming. In conclusion, I hope that the Under-Secretary General's reflections can contribute towards how Africa can develop its own navigational aids in this era of disruption. Disruption heightens vulnerability, but also brings opportunity. This opportunity can transform the way we think about Africa and the way we want Africa to not just react to global events, but how we see Africa shaping them. Thank you for allowing me to make this brief introduction, and we look forward to your comments and questions and suggestions in reaction to this Under-Secretary General's remarks. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm privileged to deliver this keynote address and exchange with you today via video message at this 21st Africa Conference. The trajectory of Africa's development has been and continues to be marked by challenges and paradoxes. As we look toward the future and work together to accelerate Africa's progress, we reflect on the continent's past. This is crucial if you want to examine how Africa can navigate disruption, build resilience, and transform its economies to aspirations of its people. Therefore, this discourse will explore Africa's journey from the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. It will look at how resilience has not been built, dissect the role of state absence in hampering development, and finally delve into our triple paradox, the interlinked challenge of finance, energy, and food systems impacting the continent's development. First, let's focus on sustainable development, SDGs to the SDGs, and how they reflect the need to build resilience, or how resilience has not been built. Africa's progress on the MDGs highlights the critical importance of resilience in achieving development goals. The MDGs were aimed to deliver immediate improvements in health, education, and poverty reduction. At the same time, they were also expected to enhance the capacity of individuals, communities, and nations to withstand future crises. Unfortunately, in Africa's case, the continent's persistent inability to build resilience proved to be a major obstacle. For example, In sub-Saharan Africa, while there was some progress, particularly in areas like primary education, where enrollment increased from 52% in 1990 to 80% in 2015, the continent did not achieve the desired outcomes. Nearly 50% of the population still lived on less than $1.25 a day by 2015, and thus failed to meet poverty reduction goal. As the global focus shifts to the more ambitious SDGs, Africa's struggles continue. The Sustainable Development Network, SDNS, reveals sobering data from their monitoring. 17 of the 20 lowest performing countries globally are African. And even more worrying trend shows that nearly half of the Africa's SDGs are either off track or have made no significant progress. Unfortunately, this frustrates the continent's vulnerability due to lack of resilience. So building resilience in Africa remains not only a developmental necessity, but an urgent priority. The continent risks further regression as future disruptions emerge, whether in the form of economic shocks, environmental crisis, or political instability. Second, let's discuss how Africa has not delivered on MDGs and is off track on the SDGs, focusing particularly on the role of state absence. The absence of an effective, capable state is a critical reason behind Africa's underperformance in achieving the MDGs, which put the continent at a starting point for the SDGs. State absence refers to the lack of governance, infrastructure, and institutional frameworks needed to deliver essential services. In turn, this hampers resilience. In fragile states, this void creates a vacuum that non-state actors are quick to claim, undermining the state's efficacy and weakening its ability to sustain long-term development. Historical colonial administrations established state systems focused on security control and resource extraction, only two functions. These left large portions of African territories with minimal governance, and legacy exists today. Countries like the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Somalia exhibit the highest level of state fragility and conflict. On the other hand, countries like Botswana, Mauritius, with more stable and effective governance structures, have demonstrated higher levels of resilience. The contrast highlights the importance of strong, inclusive state structures in delivering development outcomes. The absence of such structures creates an environment where development initiatives are often unsustainable, leading to a cycle of poverty, instability, and development. For Africa to move forward, it is imperative that the state reestablishes its presence, delivering essential services, strengthening institutions, and enforcing political stability. Third, explore Africa's triple paradox and exchange on the root causes of why the state has been absent. Africa's development challenge can be encapsulated by what we refer to in our 2023 flagship reports on the continent's development as the triple paradox. This is the complex interplay between financing, energy, and food system challenges to feed into each other, exacerbating state absence, undermining resilience across Africa. The final paradox lies in the fact that despite the continent's abundant financial resources, many African countries remain trapped in a cycle of debt distress and external dependence. In fact, African countries lose around $500 billion annually through illicit financial flows, tax evasion and avoidance, inefficient public spending and tax exemptions, mismanagement of pension funds and capital markets. This figure is more than the combined GDP of 35 countries on the continent. This reliance on external sources of finance prevents African states from achieving the financial autonomy needed to invest in infrastructure, build robust institutions, and ensure public service delivery. The energy paradox is another significant obstacle. Africa is reaching oil, gas, and renewable energy potential, yet nearly 600 million people on the continent lack access to reliable electricity. This energy deficit hampers industrial, economic development, and job creation. Without sufficient energy infrastructure, Africa cannot absorb the 18 million young people entering the labor market. This further limits the continent's ability to achieve sustainable development. The global narrative exalts a green energy straitjacket on Africa, creating an unsustainable trade-off between delivering the disease and delivering development. This green energy straitjacket requires huge upfront investments, but at the same time, it makes quasi-commercial or commercial lending the only available on a continent where many countries are not investment-grade countries. So the global narrative tells Africa to go all in. Yet at the same time, Africa's renewable energy investment at $55 billion between 2010 and 2020 accounted for just 2.4% of global energy investments, which total almost $2.3 trillion. Regions like North Africa and Southern Africa led the continent's efforts to overall investment disparity remains vast. Globally, renewable energy investment was approximately 3 times higher than Africa's share during this period, despite Africa holding 60% of the world's best solar resources, but only 1% of solar photovoltaic or PV capacity. The food systems paradox completes the triad. Despite possessing vast agricultural resources, Africa continues to face food insecurity, poor infrastructure, weak market linkage, and inadequate investment in agricultural technology prevents smallholder farmers accessing large markets. As a result, Africa's food system remains vulnerable, often creating political instability as food shortages exert social tensions. To address these interconnected processes, the role of the state must be redefined and reinvigorated. States must capacitate to exercise their primary functions, ensuring political stability, delivering services, and fostering economic growth. Key interventions such as improving domestic resource mobilization, enhancing public finance management, and investing in technology and natural resource management are critical to breaking the cycle of underdevelopment. Africa's path to resilience and transformation requires bold strategies and a renewed commitment to state building. The challenge posed by the triple paradox of finance, energy, and food systems are significant, but they are not insurmountable. By addressing these critical issues, African nations can not navigate today's disruption, but also build more resilient and prosperous future for tomorrow. The United Nations Secretary General said, the center is poised to be Africa's center. Let's rise to the challenge and work together to deliver on his goal. I wish you a fruitful action oriented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we're available now for further clarifications or questions. If I understood correctly.
Questions, guy. Don't be shy.
Hi. I would like to ask, in regards to what was said in the speech, when it comes to responsibility, who is it up to? Is it us? Is it the presidents? Is it private companies? Is it different organizations around the world? Thank you.
Excellent question. Shall we take one or two, or shall I? Let's take one or two.
Good evening. I just want to ask, how you guys go to the African Union in terms of the priorities that you mentioned?
I have a question also. When you referred to, kind of finance and extortionate financing, and I was, at times when, for example, African countries can access the global capital markets, that seems to always get celebrated. Obviously, it's coming back to quite a number of the countries now with currency devaluations and other things, but it's sort of, I'm curious why you refer to it as extortionate.
Okay, first we will take some answers and then we'll take more questions as they emerge. Firstly, very excellent question. In response to who has responsibility, the Undersecretary General has said clearly we need to strengthen the state. Because a lot of the challenges, absence of the state, is often the root cause. The inability to deliver basic services is where the problem starts. And so that's where the immediate action is needed, is in strengthening the role of the state, the capacity of the state to deliver basic services, and to particularly deliver what we might call levers and unlock other development fields. So in particular, she has focused on, and the work that we have done, the studies that we have done, show that the finance, food system, and energy are three areas that then unlock other areas. Energy is, I think, quite obvious. It's one of the best ways to improve productivity in an economy, and food systems are fundamental. In any case, and there's a huge opportunity as well, leveraging the African continental free trade area to maximize that element. But I would also like to say, as you said, you also gave examples of politicians, leaders, with us, and it's all of the above as well. And I do think that in the current environment, we need to look at leadership differently. Leadership is not only political leaders. Of course, the reason why we focus on state is that states have the responsibility for the enabling environment, the rules, the regulations, and the infrastructure that allow many other things to happen. But if we we're going to think of what will accelerate Africa's development, leadership will not be concentrated just in that political leadership. And we are seeing, for example, some of the most successful examples on the continent when startups are delivering services, for example. There are solutions that are coming from young people across the continent. If you follow the work of the United Nations, we recently agreed a pact for the future. And the pact for the future is really looking at how to empower young people to be agents for development. We can't negate the role of the state. The role of the state is there to provide guidance, regulations, infrastructure. But leadership is shared. And if we look only to political leaders, we will not necessarily have all the solutions. And I think in particular, we want to see how entrepreneurs, young people can lead in their own way and complement that framing that is required from the state. There is also a role for the multilateral system, including the United Nations. You may have noticed we're not doing so well. There are challenges which are linked to the design of the multilateral system, which was for another era. At the point at which the United Nations was created, I think Ethiopia was, we had this debate earlier, because some countries are saying differently, but I think only Ethiopia was an independent country at that point. Every other African country was under colonization. So we have a disconnect between the design of the architecture for international development and the reality of the states that are in most need of support. And there are moves to change that, negotiations happening within the United Nations. There are negotiations happening within the World Bank and IMF, Bretton Woods institutions to deal with those instruments. And we need as well states themselves to take the lead and be able to address those elements. And I think if I would say one key message to take away from the Secretary General is that the real solution and the framing will not come from outside. I make this point as well. Because we have tended to see where the reforms have happened around the edges, we are simply dealing with a reform of institutions that were created essentially to reinforce those aspects of colonialism, extraction of resources. The change in that aspect happens with intentionality at the level of African governments themselves, and again, a role for young people in terms of highlighting and speaking truth to power and highlighting where changes need to be made. I promise my answers on all the questions will not be that long. I think there was a lot of scope to cover that. The work of the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa with the African Union, we are essentially the entry point for African institutions into the United Nations system. So we work very closely with the African Union Commission in the implementation of Agenda 2063. And one of our roles is actually to help the United Nations system frame its interventions aligned with priorities defined by African institutions. We also work very closely with the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, which is one of the institutions of the African Union. And they are particularly, so if you're not familiar with the APRM, as we call it, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, it is a peer review process. So African countries look at the policies and activities of African countries and give feedback constructively in terms of how these improvements can be done. And as the United Nations, we try to provide policy guidance and responses which help them to address some of these key needs. For example, through our assessments around the Triple Paradox report, and also the recent work we've done on debt, which leads me to the next question. And I would invite you to look at our most recent Secretary General's report, which came out a few weeks ago. It's on the OSA website, and it speaks about unpacking Africa's debt. The reason I use the term extortionate is that the nature of the way in which Africa accesses capital is, again, by design, because of historical circumstance, linked to the extractive nature of African economies, which has persisted from the period of colonialism. And what that means is that African countries remain very narrow in terms of their base. We have to accept responsibility that African countries themselves have not, as the USG said, successfully created that diversification or invested to be able to change that dynamic sufficiently. But as long as capital remains expensive, we have these cycles of the crisis. And to illustrate the extortionate aspect, there are very few integrated countries in Africa, but Botswana is one. So Botswana currently accesses, and it is rated, I think the latest that I checked is BBB+ by S&P, which is one of the credit ratings. Greece, which is in Europe, is rated BBB-, very similar rating. If you're not familiar with the credit rating, it's similar, not quite exact. Like Botswana rating is a bit better, but very similar. But Botswana accesses capital at twice the price of Greece. It pays twice as much. And Botswana still has cheaper capital than almost every other African country. And the reasons for that, firstly, the methodologies of the credit rating agencies remain to some degree opaque. The parts that we do know, they look at the capacity, they look at revenue flows, predictable revenue flows. The challenges for the majority of African countries, including Botswana, is that the resource base is narrow. So Botswana has diamonds, predictable revenues from diamonds. It has successful tourism, predictable revenues, but not much else beyond that. And they will argue that Greece has many more revenues or sources potentially of revenue. That is a very gross oversimplification of their process. But the argument that is more fundamental is that if we really look at the potential of African economies, the ability to invest in the diversification of those economies is actually limited by the fact of the high cost of capital. And the difference, if you take the example of a European country, is that quite often, and if we take the example of when the European Union expanded and you have a large number of countries from Eastern Europe joining Western Europe, they actually had large amounts of guaranteed capital going into sectors that were priority, such as energy, such as water. And it meant that at that critical juncture where there was a need to invest in infrastructure, they had a lower cost. And unless we solve this problem for African countries, we continue this cycle of debt. I raised the issue of the extortionate cost of debt service. Debt service costs have doubled between 2020 and 2024 for African countries. Doubled. That's higher than for any other region. And that's because when we borrowed, African countries borrowed, let's say in 2010s, they borrowed at a slightly cheaper rate. In the aftermath of COVID, interest rates rose in the United States and elsewhere as part of active inflation. But that is translated into a higher cost, which has remained persistent for African countries. Also, sometimes cheaper capital has become expensive because of currency depreciations. Again, going to the narrow base of the economies. And so, for example, an African country borrowed prior to 2020, their currency was doing quite well because there was a large amount of foreign direct investment. COVID led to a big depreciation in their currency. The money that they borrowed in dollars now costs, and the African Development Bank figures show that between 2013 and 2020, so even prior to COVID, I don't have the latest figures, where it's even more pronounced, 50% of the increase in cost of debt service was due to currency depreciation. Again, different to regions. In Asia, for example, or in Europe, there are more avenues for what's called local currency lending. So the ability to borrow in your own currency, therefore using hedging instruments, which are very limited in Africa. So the variety of instruments that allow African countries to access capital cheap are limited and reinforces the aid dependency. Because essentially, where capital is affordable, it's either through the multilateral development banks, the World Bank, African Development Bank, or it is through bilateral aid, and often there's a quid pro quo, which is good. Allow me to share an example from my own country in Seychelles when I was serving as Minister of Finance. I won't mention the country. We wanted to redevelop our port. We had offers from certain countries that will remain nameless to invest in our port without us having to pay for that. It was apparently attractive. But when you look at the revenues that you would forego, it becomes challenging. And we actually took the decision to actually borrow, because at least we knew we had a prediction, we had predictable access to the flows that would come in the future. Not all African countries are in a position to be able to make that decision. Some have maxed out already on debt, and they have a country saying, we will invest in your port and we'll redevelop it, and in return we get the flows. And so it's important that we understand those challenges and that extortionate cost of finance. I know that it seems like an extreme term, but I think that access to capital is absolutely a fundamental barrier to development. I will be short on the next round of questions.
Thank you, everybody. For any questions, please, you briefly introduce yourself as well.
Okay, good evening. Should I go? Okay. Good evening, my name is Issa Youth Campbell from Africa in Harlem. So in this country, we deal with structural racism. Some people talk about structural racism as a broken system. Some others will say that it is a system that is working the way it is supposed to work. And when we think about Africa, don't you think that the debt system is basically the same way to keep Africa down? And do you believe with how the UN is set up, funded by these so-called biggest nations, rely on Africa's resources to where they are? Do you believe that you have the tools to make a difference?
Good evening, my name is Mahalo. I'm the Secretary of National Photography. My question, you mentioned that there are a lot of countries that have just historically good at maintaining government resilience as a response. You also mentioned countries that historically struggle. What are some recent examples of countries that have built strong government systems, built their resilience? What have they done to be successful? And how can we duplicate these best practices across countries that are not doing so well? Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Andy, and I'm part of the school. I did have a question. You said earlier that real change doesn't really come from reform. The real change or real reform doesn't really come from outside. But I wanted to ask, as an engineer, would it be better for someone who is wanting to innovate and is wanting to, produce new products or whatnot? Would it be more beneficial for me to work within Africa or work, for example, in the US right now and then go back, or Europe and stuff like that?
Hi, my name is Amina. I am from the French School, Colombia. And Jean-Paul, you just said that nobody knows you. I know you. We work together in the United Economic Commission of Africa. And we met.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yes, we met at the conference minister in Dakar. And I can tell you that you work really hard with TCND, and I was really proud of it and the resolution that was taken at the time. My question was make me a little bit fancy is because we talked about a lot of three shocks in 2022. Talk about Ukraine, COVID, but also climate change. But Madam the Secretary, triple paradox, I'm not here with climate change. And I know climate change is one of the key issues in Africa. And we're talking about it. Actually, we even spoke about the debt in Africa. Climate finance school today, and thank you for refreshing because I needed it. But my question is, where do you stand with climate change? Because I know you were a trailblazer when you were in the division. Thank you.
One more question. Should I?
Yeah, one more question. Yeah, my name is Samad. I'm studying mechanical engineering at Columbia School of Engineering. You spoke a bit about responsibility. You mentioned the youth block, and the question kind of relates to both. When people pursue education in African countries, they face the issue of accreditation and the fact that a lot of Western institutions and organizations don't recognize the validity of their education and don't hold everything that they learn to the same standard as someone who was educated in a Western institution. My mom, for example, she got an entire medical degree in Africa, and then here she came and she had to start over from nursing school. So for individuals that prefer to remain in Africa, what do you propose is the solution to the issue of accreditation? And for individuals that leave their home countries to pursue Western education, I'm
sure you're aware there's this recurrent pattern of people leaving their country with the promise to return to, their communities, and then they never do for whatever reason. So in those cases, both in the individuals who choose to stay, and then in the recurring pattern where individuals leave to pursue higher education, and then to substantiate their original communities, what do you feel like is the solution?
Okay. I see there's still hands. I've already got a long list. We'll take one more. We don't have much time left. Hi. Throw my hand. Okay. Hello, how are you?
Let's just say the more questions, the shorter I'm going to have.
Absolutely.
Mine is, I guess you could say, somewhat simple or complex. You mentioned some municipal systems, the Bretton Woods systems and some of the regulatory systems that exist. You could get into some of the variables as to why things have happened, and so on. But from a practical perspective, there are municipal double trigger systems that exist and did exist for Greece when it defaulted. In the EU, some of these double trigger systems even exist during bankruptcy. Now, I don't want you to give me a massive lecture on why, but if you could just eliminate some of the strategic reason that IMF double trigger systems that exist for defaulted countries are not being used for some of these African countries, especially given that US African, exports physical resources that are traded in global goods markets. It should, at some financial engineering level, be possible to use these double trigger systems for these countries.
I think I'm next. I think it's a little bit of a concern when you talk about the state, when you talk about lack of capacity, because I think for a lot of African countries, the problem is not lack of capacity, it's the priorities that the state has. The state has their own priorities. I'm from Kenya, and so when you're talking about young people trying to hold the state accountable, it's not like the state does not have the capacity. But the state is repressing people. And so even if I think about the Arab Spring that starts in Tunisia, what's happening in West Africa, young people really trying to rise up and shift what's happening and trying to make a change. And I'm hoping that when we're talking about navigating disruption, we're talking about the demographic dividend, which is young people in Africa today really rising up and trying to change things. And so can you speak a little bit about how we, those of us with the older generation, can support younger people who are really trying to effect change, and the state is quite capable of repressing that movement? Thanks.
Last one.
Yes. Hi, I'm Jessica, representing School of Professional Studies. So you mentioned that leadership is not just the political, and I just want to hear more about what the UN is doing to prioritize like the public-private partnerships on the local level. There's so many organizations, so many startups on the ground. So in talking about the triple paradox and really investing in Africa and people, like what is the UN really doing to hit the local level?
I'm really glad I didn't. The questions are fantastic. I don't have enough time to try to do structural racism. I think absolutely the institutions have originated in a racist environment, right? And that has impacts. It has impacts at the level of countries. It has impacts on the global institutions. And your question was, is working in the way it is supposed to work? In a degree, yes. So for example, there was recently a minister who made the point at the United Nations General Assembly that no matter how bad a situation might be in a country in Africa, there is a coup, there is a complete lack of governance, somehow the minerals still get sold. And so there is a degree of the institutions and the history of institutions perpetuate the inequality which was built in these racist colonial systems. We will have in 2025 the African Union theme of the year is Justice for Africans and People of African Descent, including the case for reparations. So this subject is very much at the forefront. The United Nations has a very difficult part of the question. The United Nations is a big part, I think, of the solutions because there are structures within the UN where these issues are being raised. There are the United Nations has also provided a lot of the studies that have shone a light on the inequities that are perpetuated within these systems. But certainly the United Nations is also a reflection in some cases. I use examples of the lack of representation, for example, in the security architecture. I would many more things to say on this, but I hope that gives you an overview, and we can perhaps discuss a bit more, so I will not be able to cover the others. Examples of successes on the continent. So the Under-Secretary General mentioned two countries, Botswana and Mauritius. I'm from Seychelles. When someone says Mauritius is successful, is anyone from Mauritius? Seychelles is there. They are immediate neighbors, so you have this rivalry. It's like Nigerians and Ghanaians. They're situated in that way. So we generally do things better than they do. But there are a number of countries in Africa that have achieved some elements of resilience. They tend to be the smaller countries that have less of the challenges, let's say, around conflicts, which are huge disruptors. But it does go back to the institutions. The capacity to mobilize resources and have predictable sources of revenues is a fundamental aspect of all of that. And I think in most of the positive examples, you will see that. Emerging examples more recently, Rwanda, some people comment about the challenges of the authoritarianism related to the country, but they are really delivering in terms of institutions that are mobilizing resources, providing predictable access to those resources. And I think there are a number of countries on the continent that are going in that direction. And it's important not to be pessimistic, because even the goal of recognizing where these challenges exist is what are the levers of change. And maybe I'll jump ahead to one of the other questions, which the problem is not capacity, it's prioritization. And it varies. In some countries you will have that challenge. The priorities are not properly defined. But if you use the example of Kenya, I would say there has already been a recognition that the voices have been heard.
No, there hasn't.
No, I know it's not. I'm not saying it's. I'm not saying that the situation is resolved. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the narrative has changed because young people spoke out. It doesn't mean necessarily that the solution is adopted, but and I think the question is saying, how can we support young people in that process? Firstly is, and the thing that the United Nations are doing, we're trying to provide platforms for young people's voices, and linking that to specific instruments of the United Nations system. Within the Pact for the Future, there is a Declaration of Future Generations. United Nations can appear often as debates around language, which are meaningless. There are many instances, however, where a text which may have seemed as symbolic is now being used in legal processes. The first mention of climate change, and that goes to the other point that was mentioned, was within the United Nations system. It's now being used as the basis for those who are law students, the basis for cases, for action in global institutions. So do not underestimate sometimes that the arc of change can be longer than we want it to be. But the focus of intentionality and providing voices and platforms for those is extremely important. The real reform coming from inside, and I think the question was, can we have more impact as Africans in the diaspora working outside, or should we go back? There's no answer, there's no right answer. Okay? Everyone has to make a contribution depending on their capacity, their means, and their situation. Some people want to make a contribution but cannot go to their country because of conflict and different reasons. The key aspect I would say is that whatever contribution you are doing, look to do more than what you are doing. And that includes whether it's a question of speaking on African issues, creating better understanding on those matters, but also, and I think the problem that sometimes arises for, let's say, startups or entrepreneurs who want to do business in Africa, they are frustrated very easily because of the lack of an enabling environment. And there's no quick fix for those elements, and I think with every challenge, there are also opportunities. There are examples where people have succeeded, and it's about learning also from experiences that have not necessarily worked. And what we try to do in the UN system is document where it does, emphasize that, and identify what are the blockages that can be addressed as quickly as possible. Climate change, costing around 5% of GDP to African countries, so a huge impact already. In terms of what I think African countries can do themselves, firstly, the model of economic growth globally has to change anyway. In Africa, there is an opportunity to lead this new form of growth. And the reason for that is because the assets are there, the agricultural land, the renewable energy resources. What's needed to unlock that is, of course, financing the investment. And also, in some cases, the enabling environment. But I do believe in an Africa-centric, Africa-positive approach to tackling the climate challenge, and using that really as the basis for a differentiated approach to industrialization. I'm very passionate about this. I can speak a lot about it, but to simplify, let's look at the agricultural system. In the Western experience of agricultural industrialization, it has involved consolidation of large tracts of land, usually with bigger corporations, often with high environmental costs, but also at cost to traditional guardians of land and so on. Using digital technologies and other advancements, we do have an opportunity in Africa to rethink the industrialization of food systems, building on existing owners of the land, because we can more easily, and I'm not going to say this is absolutely perfect, there's a growing literature which is looking at the ways in which by shared infrastructure and using things like AI, for example, today, a farmer can actually, using artificial intelligence, can get information on the soil quality in their region, and they can make an informed decision, for example, on how to fertilize. Of course, you still have to get that fertilizer to that farm. So it's not one, I'm not saying that AI is going to solve all of our problems, but there is an opportunity to build a version of agricultural industrialization which is smallholder farmer-centric, community-centric, and recognizes traditional approaches to agriculture while ramping up the efficiency and productivity of agriculture, just as an example. The recognition of education, there is within the African Union, or rather under the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, there is the Protocol on Free Movement of Persons, which is not fully operational as yet, and it is not straightforward, because countries are concerned of either losing, so there's the challenge of brain drain out of Africa towards the north, but there is also the fear among some countries of losing within the continent. The most educated Zimbabweans will go to South Africa, or the most educated people from Kenya will come to Seychelles or elsewhere. So implementing this is not straightforward, but the building blocks are within Africa and within SADC, for example, which is the Southern African Development Community. There is actually a mutual recognition of educational attainment regulations. So you can, within the SADC region, actually apply to have your certification within one country recognized within another. It's more complicated. Within SADC, there is similarity, so it's a little easier, more complicated in other parts. But one of the goals would be to have this at continental level. We don't necessarily have a solution for dealing with people who go outside of the African continent. But I think that looking at it from the perspective of facilitating already the movement of people within the continent to contribute towards goals, shared goals is positive. Bretton Woods and the double triggers system, I think one of there's not a simple answer for that, I'm so sorry. But firstly, the tools available to African countries that are potentially at distress are much less significant than, let's say, countries in Europe, partly because Europe itself has institutions within the European Union that help support that. There is also within Africa, in my opinion, too much stigma with defense. So essentially, African countries will do anything not to default. They will, in some cases, not pay salaries. Yes. I think there has to be, sometimes we have to just be brutally honest with ourselves. You can't pay your civil servants. Even if you are servicing your debt, you are in practical default. Right? If you can't meet your immediate needs and just stretching yourself, then, and sometimes it's better to just take the very tough medicine that goes with defaulting. Seychelles defaulted in 2008. I did now. Seychelles is now one of the highest rated investment nations in Africa. So it's not the end of the world. The key is, however, but there is pressure as well from a lot of these firms that are already present because of the lack of diversification in the economy, narrow base. They also don't want the country to default. They put pressure as well on political decision makers. But I think fundamentally the issue lies with the consequences of default in the current architecture are dramatic. You lose access to capital markets. There is not enough cheap financing, so countries see it as the end of the world. They lose access to capital markets, they don't have enough money, cheap money, so they see, so it's a perpetuation of the problem, and which is a little bit answering, I'll lean on the previous answer to not be too long. We could talk about this all day, but that's in essence lack of clarity on the lack of institutions that are Africa-specific dealing with debt default, global architecture also not being timely enough, the common framework, if you are aware of the common framework, so when countries default, it goes to the common framework. It took Zambia 2.5 years to reach an agreement with it, and in all that period, without access to markets. Leadership and, I think this is the last question, public-private partnerships and how young people as well can be engaged. What is the UN system doing? There's one initiative that my office is involved in. We have a fellowship for young Africans starting in 2025. It will prioritize people applying from within the continent. Even some of you, if you are interested, you could apply. There will be criteria. It will be prioritizing people who are on the continent itself. And we have a number of these fellowships, for example, with the Economic Mission of Africa, in Addis Ababa, and there are a few others across the continent. There is also usually in most UN processes, we have the multi-stakeholder process where it includes civil society, it includes NGOs, as well as also engagement with the private sector. And working through country presence in the United Nations. So in every country in Africa, there is a UN presence. There is work being done to engage, for example, the domestic private sector through the resident coordinator offices of the United Nations system. And that includes promoting and providing courses, for example, for potential young leaders in all fields. Because, again, leadership is not a post. Leadership is not a title. Leadership is, certainly to my opinion, demonstrating by doing. And I think there are many excellent examples already in Africa. I'll stop there. I think I have to. Thank you very much.
Before I proceed, I would like us to give another round of applause to that was really inspired, and I know that if I let you guys do ask questions tomorrow, just know that you still have some questions for the director. You can send them to us, and you have our email. We take very well as well. But more seriously, I think before we break down and go for our networking reception, it is important to say that we will have a lot of panels tomorrow that are covering similar topics. So save the questions, and I'm sure they'll get answered at some point over the course of 1.5 days. So thank you again. Before we break up for our networking reception, I will hand the floor over to one of our sponsors. So before I continue, I would like to first of all thank VN Global TV, our media partners and sponsors who are covering this entire event. You find some of them in front here, and we have a short message for you, which is quite interesting as well. So I'll go to them. We'll also provide you where you can actually catch this coverage. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce the CEO of VN Global TV. She's also the CEO of Global Media Maven, and she's an author, speaker, executive producer, director, a TEDx speaker, and she's also the talk show host of the Rio Show. Please welcome Rio.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I love some energy. So honored to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction, Tonte. It is an absolute honor for the Global TV team to be here to cover this extraordinary conference, and we are looking forward to being with you all this weekend. Give yourselves a round of applause before I turn it over. As Tonte said, my name is Rio Jamoda. I am the founder and the CEO of the VN Global TV Network, which was founded in South Africa in the year 2020, and initiated by the President of South Africa and the Department of Arts and Culture in the country. Founded by myself, 22 years old at the time, in my childhood bedroom in Cape Town, and with a desk, a chair, a ring light, and an iPhone 8, which is where this entire TV network began. With a vision to see the future of media and entertainment, one that is global. The future of media and entertainment that is unapologetically and envisions itself in the global ecosystem and playing field. I'm the kind of young person who likes songs like You Want to Bamba, You Want to Chill with the Big Boys, because I see myself chilling with big boys, which is why I made the move to New York City almost 2 years ago, to see this vision come to life. And which is why we are here today. Today, 4 years later, VN Global is a network that comprises of the VN Global TV channel on Roku and Fire TV, the VN Global Media and Entertainment Awards, which are set to take place in 2025. We have an equipped production studio, and a passionate crew and team that loves the media and entertainment industry as much as I do. On our 24-hour TV channel, we broadcast global lifestyle content, shows that envision a cross-continental collective, shows that show our difference, as well as our similarities as people in our diverse selves. We have talk shows, reality shows, culinary shows, we have podcasts, music-related shows, fashion-related shows, and so more in this TV channel. And all of these have one goal in mind, which is going global. Going global not necessarily physically, but the reimagining of how stories, voices, and texts could transcend barriers and borders, but in and of themselves being enough to be enjoyed and understood by a global audience. On our platform, we collaborate with creatives and storytellers who have a similar vision. Those who see themselves, their stories, and their voices worth being seen and worth being told in a global scale. The brave and unapologetic ones who are passionate about the craft, storytelling, and culture, those are the people that we work with at this network. To make this happen, we've worked hard on creating an ecosystem necessary to make VN Global a home for many creatives across continents. From the Curly Sue cooking show, which is a vegan show filmed in London, to Marcus, who is a podcast host with an acclaimed show that speaks to filmmakers in South Africa, to Abby and her girls on a reality show in Canada, and so many more, including our incredible team, some of them which are here. Marcus was behind the camera, who is part of our team, and an upcoming showrunner and producer, as well as Remy sitting right next to him, who is an aspiring journalist from the country of Uganda. We definitely are talking about going global. Those are some of the talented people and creators that we are proud to represent and to work with on this network. And from our equipped production studio in Brooklyn, our passionate crew and team, and our TV channel, we distribute and create magic together. For a north of 6 million viewers that are recorded on the platform thus far. With that, we are confident and comfortable to say that we are not just the future of media and entertainment in the global sphere, but we are the now. We are a testament of the theme of this conference, navigating disruption, and in our own right and in our industry, showcasing resilience and transformation. We therefore invite creatives to join our community. As the media partners of this incredible conference, we are proud to offer one lucky attendee of this conference an opportunity to win their own TV show. Production, studio, a crew, distribution, all set just for you. We are doing this. This is an interesting way with a raffle. So we're going to be inviting you from tomorrow to go ahead and go back home or think about that idea that you've always dreamed of being on TV and write it down, including your name and contact details. And at the registration desk tomorrow, drop it into our raffle. We invite you to also follow us on social media, particularly Instagram on VN_global, or watch on our TV channel, both on Roku and Fire TV. And as Tonte had mentioned, this conference is going to be covered on the channel and soon will be aired on the channel as well. So when you see us with our camera, do smile, because you're going to be on TV. Now the winner of the TV show raffle will be announced tomorrow in the closing remarks, so make sure that you come tomorrow, enter, and stay tuned at the end of the conference to find out if you are the winner. Have a fantastic evening, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, VN Global. Thank you, Julio. So like she said, if you see the cameras, please do smile and please don't do anything stupid. Thank you. So with that, I think that more or less wraps up the business end of.
Yes.
Oh, is that for me?
What if we are interested in the TV show but won't be here tomorrow?
Well, we can talk to her in many other shows. I'm sure she will find it. I think right now, So with that, I think that wraps up the business end of tonight. Thank you all for being here. And we have a reception in special honor of our alumni for all of you. Maybe you meet some of them there. Just light canapé and drinks. Very limited drinks. No one in issues tonight. So thank you all for coming and see you at the reception. So we're going to take a selfie right here with our speaker and the rest of you. So if you can just kind of convert middle, and we will try and take an awesome selfie like we do on TV.
That's fine.
Where is the reception? Where is the reception?
Reception is the third floor. We will have ushers directing you, so we just make a quick exit and go directly. But let's take our selfie real quick.
Can I take it, please? Can I take one? Sorry.
You need me to hide this mess.
You don't in trouble?
I'm not very good at taking camera.
Okay, let's do it. Let's see. Oh, not bad. One more. Thank you.
Taking a picture now.
We have a director if anyone has an iPhone 17, we need to be very good on that. Everybody can just converge to the center, except you don't want to be part of the your selfie. We're going to try and turn on the spotlight so that it's not in everyone's eye. So, you can stand up, by all means, please. Come right in the center, stand up. We're going to take a selfie. That's the one. Move to the center. Move to the center, please. Look at the center before you get to it. Someone's done it before. Guys, at the count of what? No one's second. Is that who's second? Okay, so the count of 5. We're gonna take a selfie.
Cheese!
Sorry. There we go. Now we're taking a selfie. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Say cheese. Cheese. Say Columbia African Conference.
Sorry.
Content.
For those who don't know where to go, just step outside. You'll get directed to the third floor. Third floor is the reception design. Third floor board. Thank you. And for those who don't remember the floor, we start at
I'm gonna give you my card.
South Africa? Take me a picture and then possibly send it to me. Yeah. I can take from the website. I can just take my picture now. On my own? Alright, cool. Okay.
Remember to keep it for tomorrow, okay? 3rd floor.
So now we're going to the third floor, take some images of the reception, and get out of here. Hi, are you going to the third floor? Okay. How are you? Philip. Hi. Careful. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Should we call 911?
No, just sue Colombia. It's easier.
You're trying to get paid, huh? So how was it? How was the first day?
Really, really informative. I think the director answered the questions really well.
Yeah.
Very careful with navigating that.
Yeah. What about you, Philip? You want to say something? How was the first day?
Interesting.
Interesting?
Um,
You want to tell us more?
No, it's just good to hear people's perspectives.
Yeah.
And, it's good to see what the UN general systems are saying to us. And if they can do something more, that's great.
But do you think they have the power to do something?
Complex, yeah. It's very complicated.
Okay. So that's the reception. So this is the reception. Seems like people are coming. The room was full downstairs, so we want to stay, but here it is. So this is the first day. If you weren't here the first day, maybe you should be here tomorrow.